Oh, we're back. We are back. Now, you might remember me saying this from my last video, and you'll notice that there's one in particular I haven't covered yet. That's Dark Souls 2. And you might be asking why that is, and the actual reason is I am fucking terrified of that game. Now, since then, I have put on my pondering cap and fought my way through Drangleic, and I am here to talk about it with you today. I want to talk about the good and also what gives me conniptions. I hope you enjoy the rest of the video, and subscribe to me if you enjoy it. Don't ask me why I have any of this. Dude, I'm not wearing this helmet for the entire video, dude. Holy shit, my head is so hot. It's got padding on the inside. It's getting real warm. Now, in Dark Souls 2, you are the bearer of the curse, destined to become hollowed because you were undead. Now, every time you die, you will lose a part of yourself, and as well as your health up here that you'll see. This is to kind of connect you to the idea of every time you die as an undead and becoming more and more closer to being a hollow, you are losing a sense of purpose and memory and becoming a husk of a person you once were. This is also quite frankly represented by the look that your character gets after you die a lot, which is close to that of a fucking toenail. Which will happen because you're going to get your ass kicked. You are then put through a tutorial in the things betwixt, and you are let loose into Majula and the Drangleic area to try and go serve your purpose. Now, Cambry, you might be asking, is there a way to solve this curse? Well, I'm glad you asked, because yes, there is. You are told to go seek the souls of the four big ones. The four great souls, if you will. Now, after you get all this, you are then told to go through the Shrine of Winter and go seek the king. Now, there are a lot of different areas you can go to off of the rip of Dark Souls 2. There's a lot of pathways. Now, some of them are inaccessible, like example, the giant fucking hole in the ground. You need a ring to go down there. This is me pausing the video because I just realized my friend plays Dark Souls in this hand formation. And I just wanted to share this with you because, oh my god. Okay, that's all. We're going to go back to the video. So, that's off limits for now. You can go to a lot of different areas. My first area was the Forest of the Fallen Giants. And this is where I noticed the first good thing about this game that I really enjoyed was the health system and life gems. Now, the health system, as you might infer, is your health. Every time you die, as I stated earlier, you lose a portion of your health. Now, while this can get really fucking bad because it can go down to 50% health and you basically get one hit by a lot of things, it can be diminished by equipping a ring that will allow you to only be able to get hollowed to 75%. Which is an actual game saver, and I recommend anyone that plays Dark Souls 2 to go get it. And number 2 was the life gems. Now, I completely get why they added this, as in Dark Souls 2, you start off with one Estus flask. It's like a premeditative way of the game saying, fuck you. In order to counteract this, they also gave you life gems, which are limited use, but you get a lot of them, and it heals you slowly over time. You kind of use this as a crutch early on, to use as a kind of almost Estus flask replacement until you can upgrade it. This let alone saved me in like 10 boss fights, which it made it feel like having one Estus flask really wasn't that bad. After going through the Forest of the Fallen Giants, you soon end up at Hyde's Tower of Flame. Which brings me to the next thing that I actually really liked, is some of the boss arenas in this game are interactive in the fact that you can do things beforehand to make it easier on you. Now, there are a couple of boss arenas like this, but this is really only seen in Dark Souls 2, and I felt like it could have been expanded upon in some of the other games. For example, the Dragon Rider, one of the first bosses you fight, ends up having a very, very small arena and will knock you off pretty easily because he's a big-ass boy. Now, you can counteract this by going around the Hyde's Tower of Flame and pulling these levers that brings up other sections of the platform, allowing it to be filled out and making you feel safe and snuggly while fighting a big grizzly man. And this isn't the only boss arena like this, which I will get to later because one of those guys is my fucking nemesis, dude. And while being in this area, I had picked up a couple of swords by now, and I noticed that dual wielding was greatly enhanced upon. Whenever you're dual wielding now, you can do a power stance allowing you to do combo abilities that make it actually viable and a ton of fun. Granted, for the majority of my playthrough, I used the shield and the sword, but I wanted to try it out, and it was very fun whenever I did it. And I also went on the Dark Souls 2 subreddit and found that there was a religion of people who dual wield great swords and great swords only, which was the highlight of my day. After this, I went to No Man's Wharf, which is a silly ass name. I'm gonna go down to No Man's Wharf, and this is where I noticed that lightning and the torch really was a aspect of Dark Souls 2 that wasn't expanded upon in the way that it should have been, and I feel like we could have implemented this in maybe some other FromSoft games a little bit more, because I loved it. In No Man's Wharf, there are some enemies that do a lot of damage, and they're big, and they look like the Demogorgon from Stranger Things. Now, these little guys are called Dark Dwellers, and although they do a lot of damage to you, they are immensely scared of fire, and they are not the only enemy in the game that is scared of fire. So holding up a torch makes this area a lot easier, as there are some pathways that there's 2 or 3 of them, and you can simply light a torch and walk past them, and they really won't hurt you, and they'll be passive. Not passive, but they really don't like light. Now, a lot of the things I just mentioned are really cool, and I love them. But if you're aware of FromSoft games and you've been in this community for a while, which, thank you for playing these games, you're the reason we're getting sequels and new FromSoft games, so that's pretty fucking sick. There are also a lot of negative things about Dark Souls that I'm sure you've heard, that Dark Souls 2 is the weakest in the series. And there are also things that I noticed that I really think that could have been improved upon. Now again, these opinions are my own, so if you like Dark Souls 2, I would love for you to comment and tell me why. I'm not coming at anyone, just my experience. The world in Dark Souls 2 is not as open and interconnected as Dark Souls 1. In Dark Souls 1, you can quite literally almost go anywhere from the starting area and end up anywhere from the starting area. And there was just a lot of different pathways that led to each area. You could go straight down to New Londo Ruins if you wanted, off of the rip, which is a very bad idea, but you could. And it was within, like, I don't know, a 2-minute run. But each of the pathways that you take in Dark Souls 2, albeit there's a lot, feel pretty linear, and eventually you will have to go back to Majula in order to go down a different pathway, which feels much more linear than all of it being connected as it was in Dark Souls 1. The rolling kept feeling off, and I was wondering why. The amount of invincibility frames didn't feel right for a while, and then I looked it up and found that there's a random fucking ability in Dark Souls 2 called adaptability, which correlates with how many iframes you get and how much resistance you have to like poison and bleeding. So if you do play Dark Souls 2, level up your adaptability because it is tied to your agility stat. Now, your agility stat is the actual stat that controls how many iframes you get, and I will put a Reddit post behind me that explains it all. The more agility you have, the more iframes you get. You basically want to get to 100 or 102 agility, and then you're pretty good on iframes. But it was really annoying that your iframes are directly correlative to a status rather than it being the default as it is in most of the other games. And again, what Dark Souls 2 is almost notoriously known for is some of the terrible running backs, which I will expand upon later, but oh boy are some of them bad. And I also felt like the controls were not as tight as they are in other games. There were times where I would roll and then hit, but it wouldn't actually hit the way I was facing, rather the way that I rolled. And it just felt like that really costed me some boss fights, specifically on one that I will get to later. Now, with all these negatives, I'm not saying that Dark Souls 2 is a bad game in any way. In fact, I love all of the games now that I've beaten all of them, besides Sekiro. That's the one FromSoft game I haven't beaten yet. I just don't think that Dark Souls 2 is necessarily as enjoyable as Dark Souls 1 or 3. I still love the world design, the wide panning shots as you enter a new area that FromSoft has kept in all their games. The many stories of the NPCs that are so cool. Even if the NPC is absolutely hammered and I have no clue how this guy gets to where he's going or how he's not dead, but I love him so much. Gavin Wheel, Gavin Deal. Or the Embedded, who you get the sword to unlock him after you defeat a boss, and it's still being speculated who he even is or what he exactly did. And that's just so cool to me, because once you unlock that gate, it still doesn't expand upon it. A lady just sings at you and then leaves. Now, some people have put together that this guy can't resist himself, and that's why he's bound up, but no one really knows what exactly he did. Now, it was my understanding that Dark Souls 2 is the most unfair and unforgiving one out of the entire games, but not in a skilled way, rather in a tedious and unfun way. Not making it a bad game at all, just there are certain areas that will really get under your skin. So, to play it safe, I usually use a strength build, but I went with a sword and shield, specifically the Drenglik sword, which is a great fucking weapon, by the way. I love its moveset so much. But near the end, I needed something with oomph, so I used Veldstat's Chime. I might be asking who I used it for. It's this fucker right here, dude. Fuck off with the delete attack, bro. dude. Oh my god. God damn it. Dude. Oh my god. Oh my god, this guy kicked my ass. But both were very viable, and I kept using the Velocet Chime for the later half of the game. Just because I'm sorry I caved. I love strength weapons so much I can't resist myself. However, a lot of weapons are viable in this game. Spellcasting is viable, dexterity is viable, dual wielding is viable, and they really enhanced upon spellcasting a lot. Dark Souls 1 spellcasting was okay, and dual wielding really wasn't fucking viable. In Dark Souls 2, dual wielding immensely viable with the Power Stance Edition, allowing you to do ability combos, as well as adding more spells for spellcasters and sorcerer builds. Which, even though I'm not a spellcaster myself, and I think you guys are a little strange, good for you, making the overall weapon possibilities much bigger than Dark Souls 1. Now, the Fume Knight was genuinely a really fun boss, and I loved him. I really had to earn that, but he was one of the few bosses that I did feel like I really had to work hard for. Some of the bosses did feel a little disappointing, and it feels like they went over quantity than quality in this one. I love the interactable arenas for Dragon Rider in particular. I love the interactable arena for Fume Knight, which I was talking about. You can put smelter wedges to destroy the Ashen Idols outside of his arena, allowing him to heal a lot less, which you want because, oh my god, that guy heals so much off of those fucking idols. I didn't have enough for one of the last ones, and the amount of times he healed off of that one pissed me off. As well as the Lost Sinner. Now, whenever you go into the Lost Sinner arena, she will swipe her sword and turn off all the lights, or turn off the lights, swipe out all the torches, making it dark. Now, what they did in Dark Souls 2 was they tied your targeting radius to the amount of lighting that's around you. If they're in the light, you can target them. If they are not, you can't, even if you can kind of see them. Now, you can go out of the boss fight room and light some of the torches, making it an easier fight. Now, the Lost Sinner necessarily wasn't a hard boss fight, but definitely an enjoyable one. However, some of the bosses are pretty goddamn disappointing, and I did not enjoy them as much. It really felt like they went for quantity over quality in some of the cases. I thought that the Covetous Demon was kind of a not great boss, which seems to be agreed upon by a lot of people, is that it's just kind of a big and awkward boss to fight and pretty easy. I also thought the Congregation was kind of disappointing. It feels like you just walked in on like some guys having a Magic the Gathering tournament, and then they all kind of walk slowly towards you, and you can just kind of run behind the pews. And none of their health is very big, so you can kill them in 1 to 2 hits. And then the Guardian Dragon was a boss fight that felt like it had some aspects to it that kind of made it repetitive and go on for too long. I didn't die at all during this boss fight. I killed it on the first try. That's not to say I don't like the designs of these bosses. I love the designs of these bosses. However, I think that their movesets were kind of lackluster, and the basic aspects of them felt kind of gimmicky in a way. I didn't like having to wait for the Guardian Dragon just to come down, because its fire was very easy to avoid, and you could just get between its legs and take out chunks of its health. Now, on the topic of disappointing bosses, there were also bosses that had some of the worst runbacks I've ever seen in a FromSoft game. Undead Chariot was pretty goddamn awful. You would spawn under the bridge area, and you have to run through the woods, up over that hill, pass through the 4 guys on the leaping trees, run past that bridge, kill the Spectre, which once you kill him, once he's gone forever, and then go do the boss fight. Now, once you kill the Spectre, you had to do all that again. And in total, it was probably like a 2-minute run all the way to get back to it, evading enemies on the way, trying not to lose your health. Another one was the Blue Smelter Demon. I have some fucking beef with the Blue Smelter Demon's run back, dude. There are spellcasters that cast AoE lightning spells. There are huge ass rock monsters that will crush the hell out of you if you're not careful. And the poise in this game is very low, so you get staggered really easily. And that was one of the more unenjoyable things, was running back and getting staggered a lot, and having to use a lot of my Estus Flask or life gems in order to just get to the boss. Now, the bosses themselves typically weren't that difficult. Now, in terms of the areas that were not fun to play through or not as enjoyable as some of the prime areas, was the Black Gulch with those fucking poison statues. If I ever see one of those ever again, I'm gonna destroy it. I fucking hate those poison statues. Iron Keep, just because I didn't like the design of it and I felt that some of the enemy placements were just unfair and kind of were wanting you to die. And that was a problem I kept running into in Dark Souls 2, was it didn't feel like you could necessarily kill all the enemies in an area without going through all your Estus. It was more so promoting you to run past them and not confront all of them, only running through again to get all the secrets in chests and then go on to the next area. Another area that I didn't like was the Shrine of Omna. Holy shit, if I see one more of those wizards, I'm gonna do some terrible things. I actually really liked the design of the area. I loved that there were the, I think it's called the Maleficentos, the women singing in the huts to keep the people who have turned into these monsters outside at bay. And I thought that was really cool lore-wise, but I just hated that the water made you slow and that there were a ton of spellcasters that you physically had to go kill because there was like 7 of them in an area, and if you didn't, you were boned. And it just wasn't fun fighting all of them at once. Again, I really like the design of these areas. I just wish that maybe some enemies were tweaked a little bit, or maybe some different enemies were put instead. Overall, I think Dark Souls 2 is a wonderful game. I think that it is a good game, but in comparison to Dark Souls 1 or Dark Souls 3, it is not necessarily as good. If you are a FromSoft fan, I would recommend you go play it. Do I recommend it as your first Dark Souls to play? Probably not. I probably wouldn't play the second one as your first title into the FromSoft franchise. I would go with a different title. But go play it if you want to. It's not a bad game by any means. I actually very much so enjoyed it. However, I'm going to get back to playing Elden Ring because I want to go do a blood build, and I've been working on it for a little bit. I hope that all of you have a wonderful rest of your day. My name is Cambrodia, and I will see you guys next time.